All right, I'm Mr. Pike, and we are continuing on in The Great Horn Spoon, by The Great Horn Spoon. We're in chapter 13 today, and this is a long chapter, so I'm going to read the first 7 pages. Chapter 13, part 1. So chapter 13, part 1, a bushel of neckties. Again, a bushel we just mentioned is like a basket about yay big, and they would collect apples or oranges or whatever fruit they have. And here we go, by The Great Horn Spoon. Sometime during the night, Cut-Eye Higgins left Hangtown for parts unknown. In the days that followed, Praiseworthy's name and reputation spread through the diggings. He was pointed out to new immigrants as someone of consequence, and Jack basked in the reflected glory. The truth of the matter was that Praiseworthy himself began to enjoy his notoriety. That's like a newfound fame. And like chameleons, the two partners changed their colors to those of the Sierra Nevadas. They wore red miner shirts and jack boots and wide-brimmed hats against the summer sun. And after a week in the diggings, there was little of the butler left to be seen in Praiseworthy, unless it was the straightness of his back or the quiet reserve of his glance. And then, as if to live up to his reputation, he stopped shaving. Within a few days, he began to look decidedly fierce. Jack collected 4 tin cans against the day when they would stake their claim. They bought a dust-stained canvas tent at the Cheap John auction and pitched it beside Pitchpine Billy's tent. And all they lacked to go prospecting was a burro and a grub stake of beans, bacon, flour, and coffee. They shoveled dirt and panned mud from morning till night. Pitchpine Billy taught them every trick he knew, including the setting of flea traps. Now, believe it or not, fleas, now they hit dogs, but they would bother people. They get in people's hair, and they were pesty. They were little pests that would bite down there. After dark, they filled their gold pans with soapy water and placed them beside a lighted candlestick in the dirt floor of the tent. "The candle gets the varmints to jumping," Pitchpine Billy exclaimed. "About the only thing a flea ain't learned to do is take a bath. They hop in the soap water and drown." But candles were $1 each, and some of the miners preferred the fleas. There were days when a man was lucky to wash out enough spangles to pay for his grub, while an ounce of gold brought $16 far away in San Francisco. It was worth a mere $4 at the diggings, and it didn't buy much. Now, if you remember from our trip, they said, who remembers how much they found on average a day just to survive? A pound. So they needed about 16 ounces a day just to pay for everything, because the prices in the diggings went higher because there was fewer of it around, supply and demand. And at $4, that didn't buy much. Onions were $1.50 a pound. That's almost much as it is today, or if not more. Supplies had to be freighted in, and prices were high. Salt pork sold for 50 cents an ounce. Gold dust seemed more plentiful than flour. Hay was weighed out at 8 cents a pound. "Oh, I seen some mighty fancy prices," laughed Pitchpine Billy, frying up a loaf of bread in his gold pan. "There was a fella come to the diggings with a jar of raisins. The boys ain't seen a raisin since they left home, and their mouths began to slabber. You'd think it was caviar in that jar. Them raisins fetched their weight in gold dust, come to $4,000. Slowly, day by day, Praiseworthy and Jack added to their grub stake. They had blankets, a dozen candles, and a coffee pot. One noon, Jack pulled up a tuft of grass, and a glint of gold from the roots made him gasp. A nugget! And then his yell carried from one end of the ravine to the other. A nugget! Maybe it looked something like this. Praiseworthy dropped his gold pan, and Pitchpine Billy squinted. Jimmy from town, who wore a mustache twisted into sharp points, came running over, and Buffalo John awoke from a sound sleep. Soon a dozen miners had left their claims to stand around and admire Jack's catch. A lump of gold was the size of an acorn. It's about this size. It was trapped in the fine grass roots like a fly in a spider's web. Maybe it'll buy a burrow, Jack grinned. Well, I don't know, smiled Pitchpine Billy. The tail of one anyways. Buffalo John pulled the bandana off his head and polished the nugget. The miners passed it around, holding it up in the sun to watch it shine, and from that moment on, it became known as Jamocha Jack's Nugget. That night, Praiseworthy and Jack and Pitchpine Billy went to town for supper. There was a letter waiting at the hotel from Dr. Buckbee. It was written in shaky handwriting. My dear friends, your letter finds me weakened by the yellow fever from Panama, and I can barely hold this pen steady. Curse that Higgins fellow and the gang of highwaymen you write of. Since I cannot leave my bed, please act as my agents in the matter. If you are able to recover my map, I will make you partners in the mine, 50-50. Act quickly, I beg you, before all is lost. Well, Praiseworthy finished reading the letter and folded it thoughtfully. A generous offer, he said to Jack. Half interest in a gold mine. Jack's yellow eyebrows lifted. All they had to do was get on the trail of those road agents. We'll need a gun, he said quickly. A 4-shooter would fit fine in his belt, alongside his horn spoon and buckskin pouch. Maybe he could trade his nugget for a pistol. Praiseworthy scratched through the stubble growing out on his face. What we need is a burro. A burro to chase outlaws? Said Jack. Praiseworthy put the letter into his shirt pocket. He shook his head. We've no time for such speculations. First, those vultures no doubt ripped open Cut-Eye Higgins' coat and discovered the map. Second, they may already have located the mine by now. Maps, Pitchpine Billy laughed. Ha! Why, there's so many maps floating around the diggings, you could paper a room with them. Boys, let's eat. They ordered Hangtown fries, platters of bacon, canned oysters, and eggs. Praiseworthy turned to Jack. What do you want to drink? Jack glanced up at the waiter. Coffee, he said. Coffee, sir, with a few acorns ground up. After dinner, Praiseworthy stayed behind in the hotel lobby to reply to Dr. Buckbee's letter. Jack and Pitchpine Billy went wandering along the street to see the sights. The auction bell began to clang. Maybe Cheap John would have pistols to sell, Jack thought. Let's go, he said. Don't mind, said Pitchpine Billy. Now the auctioneer, that's the person that sells things at the auction, placed a keg of salted butter outside the brightly lit tent, and the miners gathered around this delicacy like flies. They unclasped their jackknives and carved off butter shavings and ate them off their blades. Between the ringing of the bell and the free butter, a crowd had formed and the sale began. Frenchmen rubbed shoulders with Sonorians, and Chileans with Germans, and Missourians with Yankees, and Englishmen with Kanakas from the Sandwich Islands. And there were sailors who had deserted their ships to run off to the mines, and soldiers who had left their garrisons at Monterey and San Francisco, and the auctioneer mounted a barrel at the rear of the tent. He was a paunchy man in an open vest and a plug hat. What'll you take for the hat, Cheap John? Someone yelled. It ain't for sale, said the auctioneer. But I got 10 pounds of Chinese sugar that is. What am I bid, gents? Who'll give me $1 a pound, $1, $1. I got $1. Who'll give me $1, $1.50, half. $2. Who'll give me $2? Am I bid for $2, boys? Two. 2 pesos, said a Spaniard with the silver buttons down his trouser legs. Jack waded through the sale of sugar, a wheelbarrow, tin pans, butcher knives, and a sack of dried apples. The auctioneer seemed to have no guns. The miners stood around whittling and enjoying themselves. I got a bushel of neckties here by mistake, boys. And again, neckties are ties, and a bushel means he's got a whole bunch of them. I don't know, 20 or 30, said the Cheap John. The Cheap John is the one who's directing the auction. They'll fetch $1 apiece back in the States. What'll you give me for the lot? Am I bid $10, $10? Am I bid $9, $9, $9, $9? The miner stood grinning and whittling and silent. At that moment, Jimmy from town spied Jack and Pitchpine Billy. Let's go get something to eat, he said. My stomach feels like a cat in Hades without claws. 9, 9, 9, called the auctioneer. We've done, said Pitchpine Billy. Done what? Asked Jimmy from town, twisting the ends of his mustache angrily. 8, said Jack. 8, 8, called the miner. I'm bid $8 by the young feller with the yellow eyebrows. Sold for $8. What just happened here? Yeah.
He said 8 like the ATE, like the...
Exactly.
And he thought it was a number.
And he thought it was the number 8, E-I-G-H-T. But he said 8 as in we just ate. But the auctioneer thought he bid $8. Jack stood as if struck by lightning. The miners began to chuckle. Looks like you bought yourself a bundle of neckties, Jamocha Jack, laughed Pitchpine Billy. But I said 8, A-T-E, not 8, the number 8, Jack protested. That's what I heard you say. 8, answered the Cheap John, pushing the plug hat to the back of his head. A-T-E. We ain't much on spelling around here. It was clear to everyone that the auctioneer hadn't expected to be able to sell the neckties at all. You ain't going back on your word now, are you? Can't do that, whispered Pitchpine Billy. I'd rather see you break your leg than break your word, boy. Pay up. The auctioneer was grinning. Why, you got them neckties dirt cheap. Of course, we ain't much on wearing neckties around here in the diggings, except to be buried in. And he burst out laughing. And I'm going to end it there. We'll pick it up next time in part 2.